Namaste. Welcome to the podcast, Meaningful Lives. I'm Swami Lalitananda, the director of Yasodhara Ashram. In this series, I'm talking to people from diverse backgrounds who are driven to fulfill an inner calling and to give back to life through their particular gifts. In today's podcast, I'm speaking with Stevey Seymour. On her social media page, Stevey introduces herself with a quote from the poet Warsan Shire. I am terrifying, strange, and beautiful, something not everyone knows how to love.
Yasodhara Jamuna Tera Banachari.
I speak clearly, my voice echoing the pain of my ancestors, pulling them back, one by one, bringing them home, screaming truth into the vastness of time that buried us under mountains of lies, whispered and accepted. The ignorant defending ignorance, pulling it forth, honoring it as scripture. Spit from the tongue of serpents, gold piled on their heads, filling their minds and hearts. So I stand, speaking clearly, my voice echoing the strength of my ancestors. The truth doesn't need defending. It only needs a voice, so I give it mine. Waihi put.
That is the voice of Stevey Seymour, who is here at Yasodhara Ashram. Stevey did the yoga development course last year. She's a poet, a Sinixt woman, and I would like her to introduce herself. And first, I would like to say that the ashram is on the Sinixt unceded territory, as well as the unceded territory of the Ktunaxa people. So welcome, Stevey. Thank you for your poem.
Vai pis naxir isquis Ksxan yapisquis Stevey Seymour ken ko kaldas kuhulau ku injaliwung kikenmu taf kenlint kenala taf kenlints pidjap. I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to be here with all of you. My name's Stevey Seymour. I am, as you said, a Sinixt woman, a member of the Colville Confederated Tribes in Washington State. Yeah. And I did the YDC last year. I'm happy to be here.
And the YDC is actually a 3-month course called the Yoga Development Course. So Stevey, tell me a little bit about the Sinixt history, because we are here on the Northern Territories, as you call it.
Right.
And I think it's important for us to know what's the background.
So the Sinixt were declared extinct in 1952 by the Canadian government. This was during the Columbia River Treaty signing, all of that leading up to that time. And so we fought all these years to be able to be recognized and be able to make it back to our home territories, because about 90% of our territory is in Canada, with the very smallest portion being at the very top of the U.S., the border, or near the border between Kettle Falls. And in 2021, we won at the Supreme Court finally to be recognized as the First Nations of Canada. And so that's a really great success for us. And there's a lot of process in trying to figure out how that works. How do we fit into this new dynamic that is Canada? It's obviously a lot different than the Canada that our ancestors left. And so, yeah, I was so happy to come back up and do the YDC and be back on our territory and back in our land and back here where it feels like home in a lot of ways. Even before we ever came here, it just felt like home. And so when I came to the ashram, I felt home. And it's kind of been like that. So I'm just really happy to be back here.
Yeah.
be back home.
Yeah, and it's interesting and wonderful for us as settlers to welcome you back to your home, and kind of humbling in a way that we're part of the problem. Yeah, so I think that you've had some interesting roles in the past with your nation. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so from 2013 to 2015, I was elected onto the Colville Business Council as a representative for Inchalim. Inchalim is the largest concentration of Sinixt anywhere we're all in one place. And the main village, I think, of the Sinixt moved and kind of transferred to Inchalim. Within that process, we also picked up, marriages with the other tribes that kind of were on the way. The Colville tribe was also like a sister tribe to us. Inchalim is their territory, and we share that with them now. And so I was elected to become the culture chair of our tribe. I did that for 2 years. I worked on really interesting stuff. I worked on the ancient one, which was super exciting because he was a 10,000-year-old remains found on territories south near Tri-Cities. And I don't know if you guys have heard of him up here, but it was really great. We worked really hard. We had kind of stepped out of, I guess, what other tribes would normally do, and we went ahead and agreed to DNA tests between some of our tribal members and the remains, the 10,000-year-old remains. And it was really amazing. We found direct descendancy within our tribe. And so we were able to get the remains back without having to go to court or anything. The U.S. government said, okay, you have to give them back. And so after 20 years of fighting for him, we were able to do that. That was probably my biggest thing on council that I did with the culture committee. But we also worked really hard in language and bringing actually funding into language. At the time, there was, I think, 11 total speakers in the U.S. And so we've been mostly focusing our efforts on increasing the number of new learners of Ksxan in the United States, in our territories, and amongst our members. Ksxan is more widely spoken on the Okanogans because they've done a lot in teaching us and helping us reconnect with the language. So that's been really great. And then from council, I moved into my current position. So I've been here for 8 years now at the Inchalim Language House, Inchalim Language and Culture Association, where I work to bring language back. And it's really cool. We're in the middle of a transition right now, and we've worked for the last 12 years in doing direct classes. So we would do 3-year cohorts, and we would hire people on, pay them to learn the language for 3 years, get them up to high fluency, graduate them, and then start over with a new class. And so now we have certified over 25 people into advanced language. And so we've hit a lot of our goals, and we're kind of readjusting right now to start really working in immersion and doing immersion events, because Ksxan is spoken so widely between the Okanogans all the way down to the Sinixt that there's enough of us. When you pull all of us together there's a few hundred. And so it's amazing. And so we'll be kind of working on events trying to pull any speakers and Ksxan speakers together and work on immersion. So right now that's one exciting thing with ILCA. But yeah, mostly just working in language.
I'm really interested in the language because that's quite a dedication. And I know your mom, Shelley Boyd, who is actually the cultural facilitator for the Sinixt people.
She is. She just got a new title. Okay. I don't remember the title specifically, but I'm pretty sure it's land advisor for the Sinixt territories is what she is now. Okay. But yeah.
But she was always very proud of you and your role as the youngest member ever on the CCT Council. Yeah. Just to say, you started really young.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that is, because I know that we have a few younger generation people at the ashram whose parents were deeply involved in the ashram, and as children they were kind of brought up in this environment, and then there's certain expectations that are put on you, right, maybe unconsciously, but and how have you worked with that?
So it's really interesting. I grew up, none of my parents were traditional. And you'll find if you go into Ishlam that there's not many traditional indigenous there. And the reason is being cut off from our location. There's a lot of colonialism involved in that process. But so I wasn't raised. It's not something that we knew. When I was 8 years old, I asked my mom. We lived in Spokane. She was going to school at Gonzaga and getting her master's degree. And I asked her if she would let me move to the boarding school in Omak. And it's the mission. So it used to be a missionary school for the Colville tribe. And it was called St. Mary's Mission, but it's now called Pascal Sherman Indian School. And so she agreed and let me move there. And that was like my first introduction into really kind of understanding the culture. So I didn't grow up I should say that my mom started to become heavily evolved after my brother committed suicide. And we started working in language and we just trying to find ways to heal and to try to make sense. And that's kind of when she started really picking up the culture more and jumping into these roles. And Jim was serving as the facilitator, the position she's in now, which is her husband, Jim Boyd. And from there, it just kind of started to really build up. And it's been, I can't even believe it, probably 20 years of us just really working to learn. But it is true. And I don't know how the dynamics of the kids coming here is, but I come from parents who are very well known. All of my parents are very well known. My mom, Shelley Boyd, she's considered a leader in our tribe. And then Jim Boyd was a famous musician amongst Indian country or Native Americans, indigenous peoples. And then he was the chairman of our tribe, and he had done a lot of work. And my dad, Virgil Seymour, had done the early work of coming into the territory and starting to create meaningful relationships. These are the relationships that have carried us into the point where we are now. So I'm really proud of their work, but there is always a sense of never being good enough or never living up to what they want. And that might just be the product of being from a child of a high achiever, right? If you almost either sink or swim. And so far I'm doggy paddling through it.
Oh, your mom always says that you're way smarter than her, so I think that you've surpassed her expectations. Yeah, so interesting. Your description of it is like rising from the ashes, that you took these remnants and are weaving together the now, right, of the Sinixt people.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, and as much as as funny as it is, and not to say I'm an expert, I think though, but my parents have been the only ones to serve in this position and really work so hard for the Sinixt since this position was created. Jim, and then my dad, Virgil Seymour, and then my mom, Shelley Boyd. And so I've been blessed to be able to follow this from, I would say about 2006 is when I really started to kind of pay attention to what was happening in Canada and what we were doing. And so, it's a journey to work with my family and work under our tribe to do all of this, because it is definitely weaving stuff back in. It's made a stronger case for us. And I think, I always go back to telling my mom, things happen for a reason. And there's something here. There's something that we can bring out of all of this kind of mess it's very hurtful, and it's generations. It's not, oh, this hurt my feelings. This is generations of applied trauma. And so I think we really had to work to not only learn our traditions and try to bring those back to us, because we also had to work to try to see where those lined up. And so it was great, like looking at ethnography. And that's actually how we built our case to get back in, was because we went back in and started reading not only our ancestors' things, but the ancestors of all the settlers and the different records that they kept. And so then we could start matching stories and bringing things together. So then you'll find that there's so much interconnection between the settler experience and the Sinixt experience. And you can find where these two worlds kind of intersect and start crossing and meeting. And so that's been really interesting and heartbreaking. And I mean, over hearing the stories of all of our ancestors and the things that they had to endure and the things that they went through to keep us alive, just alive. And I was telling my mom, I think, up until last year, coming to the YDC, a lot of times I felt like I was just surviving. That was my whole life. Even though everybody around me would say, oh, she's a very high achiever, she does all these things, I would say I was barely surviving, and there was almost nothing of me there. And that's a weird thing to say, and I don't mean it like I didn't have any heart or anything, but I didn't have, I guess, more direction. I was learning all this knowledge. I was bringing things together in my head. But there was so much pain. There was so much stuff that hadn't been worked through, even trauma, like ancestral trauma, that you just, it's hard to hear about the stories that your ancestors went through or the things that were done to them. And so, I really feel like just coming here and being able to take the time to step away, because in this work, I spend so much time kind of entrenched in trauma. And if we're not reading about it, we're experiencing the everyday life of what happens when these traumas pass down generation to generation. And so, I just really feel like I learned a lot here during YDC to help me go beyond surviving. Because I didn't know I was just surviving. I thought, oh, I'm doing so great. I was like everybody else. I thought, I'm a high achiever. I have all these things done. I have all these things together. But there was so much of it that was just done in survival. So much of it that was just like, it's just so I can make it to the next day. I wasn't growing. Even getting all of the knowledge and making those connections, there wasn't a lot of growth. And so it's been really powerful over this last year to be able to kind of grow in a different way, in a more positive way. Because listening and being a part of the trauma and the things that, the debates that have to go back and forth in just the basics of getting back into the country and getting our people up here, it's overwhelming. And I don't know how my mom sits in it all the time, but I really feel like it's a bit more, there's still survival involved, but it's a bit more like living rather than surviving, if that makes sense.
Could you say more about what happened for you in the yoga development course? Like how did you get that feeling that you were there and alive?
So before the YDC, I guess it would have to start before the YDC to kind of get an understanding of the picture. And I hadn't shared this with a lot of people, but I had mental health issues that I had never had before. And I was under a lot of stress. And this was months before the YDC. But after that time, it kind of became apparent that I needed to take some breaks and kind of figure out what's going on. And so I think what happened with the YDC mostly was just, the biggest thing that I took away was journaling and learning how to like talk to myself in that way and make those connections, I think. I wouldn't say there was one specific event that happened. I came to the YDC to try to change habits. I wanted to change habits because I could see that my habits and the things that I was doing daily were what was kind of keeping me from thriving in a way. And so I came up here to learn habits, and I feel like, and not that YDC is about habits, but just the daily act of having responsibilities in a certain manner and schedules and things that I'm not accustomed to other people doing my schedules. I'm not accustomed to those things, but in the end, it really helped me to see, oh, there's another way I could try to schedule this, or there's another way that I can try to connect with myself, or there's another way that I can interact with my ancestors spiritually in a way that makes sense to me too. And so there was a lot of things I think that helped, that came from the YDC and helped me feel more aligned with the work that I'm doing and the work that I want to do. But yeah, I wouldn't say there was one thing specific. I think what that YDC really helped do is hold space and give me the space to kind of, and the tools to clear up and find more direction, my direction, not other people's direction, because that's an easy thing to fall into, especially like you said, like when you're the child of somebody who is very involved in something, there is an expectation not just from the person who's involved from it, but from the entire community around. It's an expectation that these things be taken up generation to generation. And so it was very good to be able to have that space to figure out what's my way to serve my people, what's my way to be involved and to be the most helpful. Yeah.
And what are you doing now? What's happening?
So I'm at the language house still. I've been working in language and just organizing, getting ready. Actually, I just finished a huge grant. It's $1 million grant. I'm hoping we get it, but it will be to work just in immersion, create immersion events, and really working to bring like consistency to bringing people together. It's so important for us to have our language. I think about something that one of my friends always used to say to me. He was really smart, but he would say, you know, you have to think of things and give them names. You have to name it. Nobody else can name things. Like, you have to name it, because once you name it, you have control over it. It doesn't control you. And so I think about that a lot with Sinixt stuff and with our language. And I know that my mom feels this way too, but feeling like we need to get our names back on these maps. We need to get our language in these areas so that we can start having that control and having that power to feel the connection. English is not a language that's meant to connect with anything except for money. That's specifically why English was built. It's not a language that it occurred naturally. It's a trade language. And so it takes a lot of feeling and a lot of connection and emotion out of things. For us, Indigenous people, where everything we have, everything that we are, we consider ourselves connected to the earth, except for in language. And that was because it was stolen in a lot of ways. And so it's been really important and fulfilling to bring it back, but also really hard work. Like I said, what's hard about colonization, what's really hard is it sets us up, Indigenous people, to fight each other. The goal of it is to make us not be here, right? And so, I mean, back then the goal of it was to make us not be here. But so they set it up in these ways that promotes negative interactions, I would say, between tribes and within the tribe. And so there's a lot of dysfunction that comes through the process of colonization. There's a lot of anger and negativity. And so all of these things are weeds that we're having to weed out even within our culture, because they were brought in with English. And there's emotions within our language that are not in English. There's not words or thoughts or processes that describe these emotions and way of interacting with the world and ways of being. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a lot to still be learned, and there's a lot that like I love coming up here. I love being here, and it's a space to back away from that world and be able to reflect and look into myself, and really realizing the importance of that to be able to do the work that I do, because it is emotionally hard and draining. So yeah.
Yeah. I heard you, I don't know how to say this, Stevie, but you're doing some kind of art management?
Yeah. So I have started, I've started an art management company, and this actually came from YDC. Like I wouldn't say the idea came, like I've had it for a long time, but I would say the courage to step forward and try it. That's kind of where I got it. The feeling of like, how can I help? Doing art management seems like a way that I can be most helpful, because I have a mind that can work in business and has worked in business for a long time, but that's not what I want to do. And I love art. I wouldn't say that I'm the greatest artist or that my stuff would be able to be promoted, but there's a lot of people who I know is. And the first thought was, I need to get artists into Canada. I need to get our Sinixt artists into Canada. So people can start seeing who we are and understanding our experience in a more real way. You know, when you just have like a couple of us coming up and saying things here and there, it's different than when you're having shows in different places and people that you can interact with and get these different perspectives, because you hear my perspective, but I'm only one. There's 3,000 of us. And my experience is different. And so just being able to share that, because it's kind of like, I would say like Cali, like as hard as things are, or as hard as this is, there's a beauty, there's something in there that's really powerful and raw, I would say, like within our people. And so it's hard, but it's also beautiful to be, I guess, being like the Phoenix and kind of coming up. And so that's what I want to share with, not just in Canada, but everywhere. And not just Sinixt people, but I do want to have that focus. And I'm mostly starting out right now in performance arts. Yeah, so I'll be managing like musicians and stuff. But the goal is not to be kind of contained to any art, mostly just contained to Indigenous peoples, not necessarily of North America either. Okay. Yeah, because I really feel like everybody's Indigenous. And I think that that's one thing that's hard for some people to like wrap their heads around. I'm like, everybody's Indigenous. You're Indigenous from somewhere. You didn't just show up out of thin air, you know? Right. And those things are really powerful, and they're really important. So like, even like talking to people like from say Ireland and Scotland, they have a lot of tribal peoples there who are very similar to us in belief system. And so looking at that and kind of paying attention to that, like Indigenous can be anywhere and everybody is Indigenous. And that's why that is important, because those connections with the land are still important. I'm not telling anybody go back from where you're from, but I am saying go back to where you're from and feel the land. You know, you can always come back. There's nothing wrong, but sit on it for a minute and be in it and see how it feels. Because I was somebody who was away from my land. Like so many of the settlers here, they're away from their lands for hundreds of years now without going back to their homes. This is like us. But when I came home, when I came up this valley into the mountains, I knew I was home. The land knew me automatically. It was just amazing. And so it's not, I don't want to take that from anybody. I don't care about color of skin. Indigenous is just wherever you're from, and that's a beautiful thing. And to be able to share that is a beautiful thing. So when I talk about artist management, Indigenous artist management, it's like everybody, but it is along the lines of Indigenous. So, yeah.
Cal, It sounds like that would be stimulating and give you something back as well.
Yeah.
You talked about thriving, and the connection that you described seemed like so deep and heartfelt. And if you're helping people make that connection, then you're giving something that's really precious.
Yeah. Well, and just for the artists to be able to feel like somebody believes in them. Indigenous artists, there's like no management. There's nobody who reaches out to Indigenous artists and says, hey, let me manage you and make this really popular. Mm-hmm. And so that validation isn't there for a lot of artists, but regardless of how amazing their work is. And so I'm just really excited about it. Like the artists that I've been talking to are really excited to have somebody interested in saying, let's share this with not just me, but like everybody.
I have a question about people like us at the ashram. So it's wonderful that you could come here and that we have that space for you to enter into that helped with your next steps and for you to get perspective. Do you have any suggestions for the best way to support like that direction of Indigenous identity, really, and reclamation for people who are settlers on the territory?
Right. So that's an interesting question, because I would say in most places that there's easy access, that there's availability, because in most places there's an Indigenous presence. That's just not true here. And so it's not as easy to say, okay, you can do this and help this way. But one of the things that I think is really important in this area and on this territory is to be concerned with the facts and to just be concerned with the truth. That's the biggest thing I would say is the most important, because what has happened here is there's just been an overcrowding of the Canadian government having Indigenous tribes claim large swaths of land in order to just be able to make it by. And so this is something that the Canadian government did. But what it caused is a overrun of this area of people who are claiming right and title in the Arrow with no cultural presence or connection. And what that did was eliminate us. It made it okay for us not to be here. But I don't believe that the land thinks it's okay for us not to be here. So I think that the one thing that people could do is just try to pay attention to facts and not saying anybody is like being false or lying, because I don't think that that's truth in the area of what's happening in this area. But a lot of facts have been kind of tucked away for a while. And so being open to learning what those facts are, I think would be the best thing. Just being open to learning it and then being there. It's, as you said, maybe not a non-Indigenous person's fight or place to be, which I agree, unless they decide they want to. But it's still a responsibility to the land to understand the land, the history of the land, and we're a part of that history. And so I think that that's an important thing.
Yeah. I was thinking about how much you're part of the history if the ancient one was 10,000 years and you have your DNA running through that.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive history.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is, I don't know if my mom's ever told you the story of how we got here. Or our story of how we got here. I'll tell the woman's story. I don't really know the man's story. Men came before women here, according to our stories. But my grandma, I never met her, but she was a speaker. She was my great grandma, actually. And she did all these recordings with Tony Matina, who was a linguist who came to our town and recorded with my grandpa Pete and a couple other elders, as well as my grandma Helen. We have a audio of her telling this story of how woman was created. And it's just, I love it. It's my favorite story. But I'll just make it short. And she says, man was lonely and he was praying for not to be lonely, whatever that meant. And so he received instructions on what to do. You need to go make a gown from squirrel pelts. You need to dig a hole in your living room, and you actually need to put a screen around it. And not living room, but in your home. And all these specific instructions. And the man's like, okay, he goes and does all these things. And after 6 months, he sees something poking out of the hole. And he's like, paying attention. He keeps watching, and it keeps coming up further. And finally he gets curious and he decides to go, he's going to pull it out. And he pulls it, and he pulls her head clean out, and her head's popped up above, and she tells him, hey, you're not supposed to touch me. And matter of fact, you never, ever, ever touch me unless I ask you to touch me. Now, and she tells him, you go put everything back and leave me alone. I will come out when I'm ready. And so that's what he did. And after a period of time, she comes out, and she's his partner, and she's, grown from him. But so we believe that Sinixt women we came from the earth here, and that's how we were grown, like a plant. And so the men, I like I said, I can't remember the story for the men, but this is the story my grandma told us for the women. I always think of that. I always think, my DNA connects directly to this earth. And I think that someday we'll probably find truth in that. We'll probably find those connections marked in our DNA somewhere, someday. Yeah. Because I do believe that they're there. And I do believe that going back to the places that your blood comes from is healing. I think that that's what, not taking anything away from the ashram or the practices here, because I learned so much that helped me. But I also think what was the most healing was just to be on the land. And so, yeah, I feel much better after it, ladies.
That's so good. Yeah, thank you, Stevey. So even though you're resurrecting, and I love the story, thank you, bringing your language back, you're also strong with representing your power through the English language, through poetry. You've been able to do that, to have that voice that's very much your own voice, but also reflects who you are as part of your tribe, right, or your nation. And I wonder if you have another poem for us.
Yeah, I can do another one. God came to me last night. He got on his knees and worshipped at the bones of my ancestors. He knows he owes us a great debt. We are the pain eaters, and we are the dream weavers, weaving our DNA through all space and time, so that when we ask for forgiveness for our sins, it heals the world and makes her new again. Heroes are not made in spotlights. They are built in the dark. Silence is our language, and we echo in caverns and thunder on mountain summits. We are the true meaning of love. We are the gatekeepers who scream down into the valleys that all shall be healed here. Perfection is found in darkness. Darkness is our home, and all are welcome here. Hai Put.
Thanks for listening. Yasodhara Ashram is located in Kootenay Bay, British Columbia, Canada, on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Sinixt and Ktunaxa people. You can find out more at yasodhara.org.